Hello and a very good evening. You're watching the news at 6 on Rajya Sabha television with me, Frank Pereira. Here are the headlines. India exercises right to reply during general debate of the United Nations General Assembly, tells Pakistan that should be known as Terroristan in view of its contribution to world terror. Responding to Pakistani firing on the border, India's Director General of Military Operations says Indian Army reserves the right to retaliate appropriately to any loss of life on the Indian side. Finance Minister Arun Jaitley says stressed assets are a core area of concern in the banking system, assures that the government will provide resources for stressed banks to help economic growth. And Iran says its nuclear accord with world powers can't be renegotiated. China and Germany say abandoning the deal will with nations like North Korea from approaching talks on ending their own nuclear programs. Well, India gave a stern response to Pakistani Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina on the United Nations. Now, India said Pakistan is a geography synonymous with the terror, terming it as Terroristan. It also stressed that no amount of cross-border terrorism perpetrated by Pakistan will undermine India's territorial integrity. This in response to the Pak Prime Minister's speech at the UNGA, in which he accused India of terror against his country and war crimes in Kashmir.
India on Thursday exercised the right to reply during the general debate of the 72nd session of the United Nations General Assembly. Responding to remarks made by Pakistan Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, India's first secretary to the UN, Inam Gambhir, said Pakistan should be known as Terroristan, given its contribution to world terror.
Short history, Pakistan has become a geography synonymous with terror. The quest for a land of pure has actually produced the land of pure terror. Pakistan is now Terroristan, with a flourishing industry producing and exporting global terrorism.
Gambhir said it's extraordinary that the state which protected Osama bin Laden and sheltered Mullah Omar is now playing a victim of terrorism.
By now, all Pakistan's neighbors are painfully familiar with these tactics of creating narratives based on distortions, deception and deceit. Its current state can be gauged from the fact that Hafiz Mohammed Saeed, a leader of the United Nations designated terrorist organization, Lashkar-e-Taiba, is now sought to be legitimized as a leader of a political party.
The First Secretary also reiterated that Jammu and Kashmir is an inalienable part of India and Pakistan will never succeed in imposing its control over it despite fomenting cross-border terrorism.
Pakistan must understand that the state of Jammu and Kashmir is and will always remain an integral part of India. However much it scales up cross-border terrorism, it will never succeed in undermining India's territorial integrity.
External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj also underscored the need to combat terrorism in her multilateral meetings with member countries of BRICS, IBSA and the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States.
EM herself, in her speech, she did come down heavily on terror groups operating with support system by other countries. It is basically a very strong signal to Pakistan to stop using terrorism as an instrument of their state policy, stop giving sanctuaries to known terrorist outfits that are recognized by the United Nations. And she also called for disruption of terrorist networks and terrorist financing.
In his maiden address to the United Nations on Thursday, Pakistan Prime Minister Abbasi had accused India of engaging in terrorist activities and spoke of repeated ceasefire violations on the border since January. He also called for the appointment of a special UN envoy to Kashmir to resolve the Kashmir dispute. Akhilesh Suman's report for Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, addressing a trilateral meeting of India, Brazil and South Africa, External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj called for an early reform of the United Nations Security Council. In a joint statement, the three-member bloc emphasized the urgent need for a comprehensive reform of global institutions of political and economic governance. The three ministers also exchanged views on the global political and economic situation and reform of global governance and sustainable development.
At the IBSA, EAM chaired the meeting. She again touched upon the issue of terrorism, and she mentioned that it is a threat to the world. And increasingly, as I mentioned, that most of the countries all the countries who are part of this grouping, they agreed with this nature of threat.
Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina raised the issue of the Rohingya crisis in the United Nations. She urged the international community to take immediate measures to find a permanent solution. US authorities are also pressing Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi to stop the crackdown on Rohingya Muslims.
Excellency.
Bangladeshi Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina on Friday urged the United Nations to create UN-supervised safe zones inside Myanmar to protect Rohingya Muslims. She asserted that the Rohingya Muslims, which fled Myanmar fearing death, must be able to return with respect and dignity. Hasina was addressing the international community at the 72nd United Nations General Assembly in New York. According to the United Nations, Bangladesh is sheltering over 420,000 displaced Rohingyas from Myanmar. Hasina also laid out a plan for the UN to guarantee safe return of the refugees to Myanmar.
Rohingya সমস্যার স্থায়ী সমাধানে দ্রুত কার্যকর উদ্যোগ গ্রহণের জন্য আমি জাতিসংঘ এবং আন্তর্জাতিক সম্প্রদায়কে আহ্বান জানাচ্ছি। এ প্রসঙ্গে আমি কিছু সুনির্দিষ্ট প্রস্তাব পেশ করছি। প্রথমত, অনতিবিলম্বে এবং চিরতরে মিয়ানমারের সহিংসতা ও জাতিগত নিধন নিঃশর্তে বন্ধ করা। দ্বিতীয়ত, অনতিবিলম্বে মিয়ানমারের জাতিসংঘের মহাসচিবের নিজস্ব একটি অনুসন্ধানী দল প্রেরণ করা।
On the other hand, the United States is pressing Myanmar State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi and its military leaders to stop the crackdown.
We pressed her, we pressed the military. So we had two things happening. Secretary Tillerson did call her and did discuss the situation with her, but then also General Dunford is calling the head of the military to say, look, we've had a relationship with you, but this cannot continue and we need to know what you're going to do about it.
Global Food Charity Action Against Hunger has offered to feed at least 86,000 Rohingya refugees stranded on the Myanmar-Bangladesh border. The group, which has a food program, will focus its efforts primarily on severely malnutritioned refugees. Report Rajya Sabha TV.
But in a strongly worded message to Pakistan, India's Director General of Military Operations on Friday made it clear that the Indian Army reserves the right to retaliate appropriately to any incident leading to loss of life on the Indian side. The talks were initiated after continuous firing and shelling by Pakistani troops along the borders this week.
Director General of Military Operations Lieutenant General A.K. Bhatt spoke with his Pakistani counterpart Major General Sahir Shamshad Mirza over the hotline on Friday afternoon. The Indian Army's DGMO conveyed to his Pakistani counterpart that the continuous trend of cross-border infiltration with active support of Pakistan has been impacting peace and tranquility in the border areas and affecting the internal security situation in Jammu and Kashmir. The telephonic conversation was initiated by Major General Mirza, who claimed the Indian Army was targeting Pakistani civilians in the Jammu sector. But the Indian DGMO highlighted that all ceasefire violations in the Jammu sector were initiated by Pakistani Rangers and BSF troops had only responded appropriately to them. The DGMO also reaffirmed that the Indian Army would like to maintain peace and tranquility along the LOC if there was a reciprocal effort from Pakistan. Jammu and Kashmir police arrested 2 militants involved in a terror attack on the Sashastra Seema Bal in Benihal area. A head constable of the SSB was killed and another Jawan was injured in the attack. Police also recovered arms and ammunition from them.
They did a great job. And they finally identified the general area of Kaskut where they would be hiding themselves. And it took a lot of time. And within 30 hours, they managed to nab them, despite their resistance.
Police has also evacuated over 700 border dwellers caught in shelling and firing by Pakistani troops along the international border in Jammu and Samba districts. 6 civilians were injured on Thursday as Pakistani troops targeted Indian border outposts and villages along the international border. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived at his Lok Sabha constituency of Varanasi today for a 2-day visit, inaugurating the Utkarsh Bank, which specializes in microfinance to self-help groups. The Prime Minister hailed Yogi Adityanath's government for completing many pending projects. He flagged off the Mahamana Express, which connects Varanasi to Surat and Vadodara. He inaugurated the Deen Dayal Hatskala Sankul, a trade facilitation center for weavers and handicraft workers.
दुनिया भी भारत की विशेषताओं के प्रति आकर्षित हो रही है और इसलिए 300 करोड़ की लागत से बनी हुई ये इमारत ये सिर्फ इमारत नहीं है, ये भारत के सामर्थ्य का परिचय कराने वाली, ये हमारे काशी क्षेत्र के शिल्पकार बुनकरों के सामर्थ्य की एक ऐसी कथा को संजोए हुए है जो भविष्य के नए दरवाजे खोलने की ताकत रखते हैं.
While describing the youth as the hope of the country, Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu has stressed on the importance of public-private partnerships. Inaugurating a 2-day leadership seminar at the India School of Business in Mohali, the Vice President said that the country's development will be complete only when its benefits reach every person across it.
Addressing young entrepreneurs at the Indian School of Business in Mohali, Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu spoke about democratic values, constitutional rights and their limitations. Talking about the importance of tolerance, the Vice President said that it is at the core of India's value system and that although differences were inevitable, separatist tendencies must be avoided.
Liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith and worship. Irrespective of caste, creed, sex, religion and region, India is one. We are one nation, one people, one country. अलग भाषा अलग वेश फिर भी अपना एक देश. विविधता में एकता भारत का विशेषता, ये हमारा हमेशा हमारा ध्यान में होना चाहिए. That's the beauty of India.
The Vice President said that individual and religious freedom were within the ambit of a citizen's rights. However, he said that these freedoms should not hurt others' feelings.
But all these things are within the constitutional permissible limit of your expression, should not hurt others, should not injure their feelings. And you have no liberty to create social tensions. That has to be kept in mind.
Saying that youth are the hope of the country, the Vice President also stressed on the importance of public-private partnership. He also said that the contribution of women was of utmost importance for development.
We have a great tradition. Some people innocently say, no, this is all because of our philosophy, this Hindu philosophy, that nothing. See our philosophy, see our culture, see our Puranas. Women are given the highest importance. All the rivers in the country, important rivers at least, Ganga, Yamuna, Kaveri, Krishna, Narmada, Mahanadi, Tapati, all named after women only. Even the country also, we call it as, our culture is such that we call it as Mother India.
Vice President Naidu urged the youngsters to ensure that the benefits of development reaches each and every person in the country, and said this could be achieved using the 5P model. This includes people, planet, prosperity, peace and partnership. Om Prakash's report for Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, moving on now, of course, with bad loans continuing to plague the banking sector, Finance Minister Arun Jaitley on Friday said that resources for stressed banks will be provided funds for economic growth. Jaitley also stressed that bank assets have become a concern for the economy and bad loans have crinkled the ability of Indian lenders to offer new credit.
Inaugurating the annual general meeting of the Indian Banks Association in Mumbai, Finance Minister Arun Jaitley said that stressed assets are a core area of concern and the government will expeditiously work with the banking system to resolve the issue. The Finance Minister's assertion gains currency as the bad loan ratio is expected to rise by 1 percentage point to 10.5% by March 2018.
The manner in which the bankruptcy and insolvency laws operate globally, all institutions in India are able to realize the culture and the circumstances under which these institutions function.
The Finance Minister also underscored that the implementation of GST is going smoother than expected, exuding confidence that the number of people under the network will expand gradually.
The decision-making mechanism on the top between the centre and the states has been reasonably institutionalized. A mechanism to address day-to-day issues itself has been created and is fairly robust.
Acknowledging the role of banks in increasing financial inclusion as well as handling the demonetization drive successfully, Jaitley asserted that the decision to scrap high-value currency notes was a conscious effort to alter the spending and saving pattern of the Indian society, which was largely cash-dependent. Kriti Mishra, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, let's now get you a roundup of some other news from across the country. The Karnataka High Court granted interim stay to former Chief Minister Yediyurappa on FIRs filed by the Anti-Corruption Bureau for alleged illegal denotification of land. Justice Arvind Kumar granted the stay on the grounds of lack of sufficient material to prove cognizable offences. President Ramnath Kovind today visited Diksha Bhumi to pay tribute to Bharat Ratna Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar in Nagpur. The President inaugurated the Vipassana Meditation Center at the Dragon Palace Temple in Kamptee. He also attended a special Buddha Vandana at the temple. Now, the President will also inaugurate Suresh Bhatt Auditorium in Nagpur. Two additional district judges, Justice Irfan Ahmed and Justice Amarjeet Tripathi, were appointed as observers at the Babri Masjid Ram Janmabhoomi site in Ayodhya by the Allahabad High Court. They will submit fortnightly reports to the Supreme Court on the disputed site status and the adjacent excess area that was acquired. Well, moving on to some international news now, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani has said that on Thursday that its nuclear accord with world powers cannot be renegotiated. This after the Trump administration warned it was weighing whether the deal signed by its predecessor served US security interests or not. Meanwhile, countries like China and Germany say that abandoning the Iranian nuclear deal would discourage other powers such as North Korea from participating in international negotiations to end their own nuclear programs.
The fate of the nuclear agreement between Iran and the major world powers is in the balance. And not one to sit back and wait for the uncertainty to continue, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani took the stage at the United Nations General Assembly meeting and proceeded to deliver a lengthy speech, almost entirely focused on blasting the US President Trump. Hours later, he also addressed an armed forces parade in Tehran and said Iran would not stop building its military forces.
چه شما بخواهید چه نخواهید ما قدرت دفاعی و نظامی خودمون را اون مقدار که لازم بدانیم و برای بازدارندگی ضروری بدانیم تقویت خواهیم کرد. نه تنها موشک هامون را تقویت میکنیم بلکه نیروی زمینیمون، نیروی هواییمون، نیروی دریاییمون مورد حمایت همه مردم مسلمان و غیور این سرزمین است. ما برای دفاع از کشورمان، سرزمینمان از کسی اجازه نخواهیم گرفت.
Rouhani's speech comes a day after Trump used his speech at the UN to slam Iran. He labeled Iran's government a corrupt dictatorship and sharply criticized the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran, calling it one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the US has ever entered into. Rouhani in a speech fired back and also distanced Iran from many wrongdoings around the world.
ملت بزرگ ایران همواره از مظلومین جهان دفاع کرده است. چه شما بخواهید چه نخواهید ما از مردم مظلوم یمن، مردم مظلوم سوریه، مردم مظلوم فلسطین دفاع خواهیم کرد.
Interestingly, China, Germany and Russia said that any move by Washington to cancel the Iran agreement would be a terrible signal for all other efforts to use diplomacy to halt nuclear weapons programs such as those of North Korea.
Wir müssen das klare Signal aussenden, die internationale Gemeinschaft wird nicht nukleare Provokationen Nordkoreas akzeptieren. Deutschland begrüßt die vom Sicherheitsrat beschlossenen Sanktionen und hat sich nicht nur für die schnelle Umsetzung auf europäischer Ebene stark gemacht, sondern unterstützt auch, dass wir in Europa darüber hinausgehen. Gleichzeitig müssen wir aber alle diplomatischen Mittel nutzen, um zunächst die Lage zu entschärfen und dann einen Ausgangspunkt für längerfristige Lösungen zu finden.
The deal, which came into effect in October 2015, imposed constraints on Tehran's nuclear activities in return for the lifting of some economic sanctions. Germany had helped negotiate the deal along with Britain, China, France, Russia and the United States. The next few weeks will now be critical as President Trump is due to certify whether the deal is still in US interests in mid-October. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, after successive missile tests and threats to attack US and its allies, North Korea now says it is considering testing a hydrogen bomb over the Pacific Ocean. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un warned of the highest level of hardline countermeasure in history against the United States. Kim even called US President Donald Trump mentally deranged.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un launched an unprecedented personal attack on US President Donald Trump hours after the latter ordered fresh sanctions over Pyongyang's nuclear program. Calling Trump mentally deranged, Kim said his UN speech on Tuesday confirmed that Pyongyang's nuclear program is on the correct path. In a statement carried by the North's official KCNA news agency, Kim pledged to make Trump pay dearly for threatening to destroy his country. North Korean Foreign Minister Ri Yong warned that his country may test a hydrogen bomb in the Pacific Ocean.
역대급 수소탄 지상 시험을 아마 태평양상에서 하는 것으로 되지 않겠는가.
The statements from North Korea drew angry reactions from Japan and South Korea.
北朝鮮による挑発的な言動、これについて我が国としてはこの地域および国際社会の安全保障に関する明らかな挑発行動であり断じて容認することはできない。
북한은 더 이상 타국을 적대하고 스스로를 고립과 몰락으로 이끄는 무모한 도발을 즉각 중단하고 북핵 문제의 평화적 해결을 위해 비핵화를 위한 대화의 장으로 나오는 선택을 해야 할 것입니다.
China called on all parties to exercise restraint to avoid further escalation of tensions.
我只能再重复一下中方的立场。半岛局势现在非常复杂敏感，有关各方呢都应当保持克制，致力于缓和局势，而不是相互刺激。我们相信，只有有关各方都负起应负的责任，相向而行，才能够真正的解决半岛问题。
Tensions on the Korean peninsula are at an all-time high following Pyongyang's successive missile tests and rhetoric. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
After devastating the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico, Hurricane Maria is nearing the Turks and Caicos Islands as it continues its destructive path across the Caribbean. According to U.S. National Hurricane Center, the storm, now a Category 3, is east of the island of Grand Turk with winds of 125 miles per hour. Meanwhile, Puerto Rico has completely lost power and is being subjected to heavy rain and flooding with possible mudslides. The death toll rose to 22 on Friday, with 2 more deaths reported in the region. On Thursday, Hurricane Maria pounded parts of the Dominican Republic with heavy rain causing severe flooding, especially in eastern parts of the country. At least 15 people in Dominica alone, and 20 are still missing after the storm swept through the Caribbean island. Well, that's it on this newscast. Do stay tuned for the big picture on the other side of the short break.